Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Winona Bateman, she, her. I'm the Director of Families for a Livable Climate. And we are so happy to be hosting this event with Stories for Action. And we're very thankful to the panelists who are with us today, contributing their time and their expertise about this topic. Families for a Livable Climate's mission is to create community for climate action, empowering families to advocate for a livable future. This is the fourth and final event in our Systems Change series, where we look at personal actions we can take to make a positive impact on the climate crisis and examine how those actions bridge into system-wide changes. Today, we're going to be focusing on how actions taken on our front steps and in Montana's towns can have great impact on waterways, biodiversity, climate action, and our communities. Next week, we will send you a link to the recording with some follow-up resources and contact information, so watch for that. Our next event is March 4th with Harriet Sugarman, also known as Climate Mama, and we are going to be having a conversation about how to talk to your kids about climate change. So you can find out more information about that event at livableclimate.org. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Lara Tomov. Lara serves on our leadership team and is the director of Stories for Action, a media brand whose mission is to use the power of storytelling to advance healthy environments and strong communities. Her work in film and media took her around the world for many years, and she is happy to return to her original home of Montana, where stories of the relationship between humans and the land are abundant. So I'm going to pass to Laura. Thanks again for joining us, and I'm going to let her take over.
Thank you so much, Winona, and thank you so much to our panelists and all of you for tuning in to dive into these topics. Here in Montana, there's a great deal of conversation and action around our open wild lands, and that's rightfully so, but it's critical that we remember to look at what goes on in our residential and urban spaces. 80% of Montana's population lives in or within 50 miles of our major urban areas, and as our towns and residential developments inevitably will grow and can continue to expand, it's important to pay attention to how that expansion occurs. We have a real chance to get it right, and by taking the time and effort to implement some of the concepts which we'll discuss today, the way in which we grow can benefit public health, equity, infrastructure, cultural identity, wildlife corridors, and maintain the values that Montanans love this place to begin with. Before beginning with our speakers today, we'd like to acknowledge that the current urban and residential spaces of Montana are a result of the colonization of this land. And as we move forward, may we recognize the impact of this and find ways to respect and honor the land, our place within it, and the land's native inhabitants and stewards. We're very fortunate to have with us today Rose Bear-Don't-Walk to speak on her work with ecological and cultural connections to place. Rose is a member of the Bitterroot Salish and Apsaalooke tribes, and we're grateful to have her give this acknowledgement to the lands that we reside upon.
All right, Lem Laura, for that. I'm just going to do a quick little land acknowledgement based on where we're at today. So our discussion today primarily covers the landscape of what is now Montana. This land is part of the original territories of the Assiniboine, Apsaalooke, or Crow, Blackfeet, Chippewa, Cree, Gros Ventre, Kootenai, Little Shell Chippewa, Northern Cheyenne, Pend Oreille, Bitterroot, Salish, Sioux, and the other tribes that have interacted with these lands. Since time immemorial, the people of these nations held a reciprocal relationship with the land and all the life that it supported. When the land was forcibly stolen through Western colonization, the deterioration of the healthy interactions between people and the natural world began. But today, the land and the people have survived and are working to reestablish and continue this relationship. Therefore, it's important today and every day that we honor the land, waters, and all beings that make these places home by recognizing the relationships between all life and that what we do in our personal space affects all life near and far. May we honor the people of the indigenous nations that live today on these lands.
Thank you so much, Rose. And just to follow up to that, in Montana, there's a great deal of work centered around the interactions with the health of the land. And it's critical in this work that we honor and take leadership from the peoples who held a model way of reciprocity and healthy interactions with these lands. We can honor these peoples by supporting their communities that our Western ways have impacted. Just a few examples of doing this include supporting health facilities such as the Billings Urban Indian Health and Wellness Center, All Nations Health Center in Missoula, and the Indian Family Health Clinic in Great Falls, among many others. Also supporting organizations such as the Montana Racial Equity Project and Montana's ACLU, which is taking on issues such as voting access for Native communities. And you can also contact representatives and speak up for issues that impact Native treaty rights, tribal sovereignty, missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, and to ensure that Native tribal members are truly represented in the shaping of Montana policy and our land stewardship. As many of you know, our state is currently holding its legislative session through May 1st, and there are many bills proposed that speak to these topics, as well as bills that affect climate action, social justice, and environmental health. So now is a key time to tune in and reach out to your representatives. And a layout for today's event, we'll have each speaker speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. If you have additional questions, you can put them in the chat, and if we have time at the end, we'll circle back. And now I'd like to further introduce our first speaker, Rose Beardonwalk. Rose is an ethnobotanist, and as I mentioned, a member of the Bitterroot, Salish, and Apsaalooke tribes. She holds a BA from Yale University and a Master's of Science in Environmental Studies from the University of Montana. Rose was awarded a Fellowship for the Future by 500 Women Scientists for her program, Recovering Our Roots, which bridges ecological knowledge of local plants with food sovereignty, improved nutrition, and cultural connections for the Salish community. Thank you so much for being here, Rose.
Thanks, super excited to meet all of you and also learn a lot from the other panelists. Really excited to see what you guys bring to the table. So I have a presentation I use a lot just to kind of cover what I do exactly. Let me see if I can make this bigger. This was a presentation I did earlier this year. Let's go from there. So I think this kind of goes along with what we're discussing today, Indigenous ethnobotany. I'll talk about what ethnobotany is in a second, and how it's a promise as people to plants and to the land. More specifically, ethnobotany is the scientific study of traditional knowledge and customs of people concerning plants and their many uses in a society. I started taking on ethnobotany because I became very interested in food systems when I was doing my my undergraduate degree, just because I was really focused on political inequity and how Indigenous peoples have really been distanced from their traditional food systems, and how the imposed Western food systems has had a really big impact on their health and their cultural longevity. But in tackling this issue, I really wanted to go into something that I could enact small steps and actually make change, something that was, sizable for me to take on. And growing up, I had always been involved in learning about traditional plants and traditional foods. A lot of our traditional food ceremonies are taken on by women specifically. So my mom did a really good job at bringing me to different celebrations and events, and just really getting me in there and understanding what my role was as a Salish woman. So ethnobotany is the combination of kind of how I want to focus on food. So I focus specifically on food plants, but how I also want to focus on the cultural components of how Salish people form relationships with plants and with food. Just because plants have been such a central piece of our culture for thousands of years. We've used it for tools, for medicine, for food. shelters. We use it as ways to keep track of time. So there's just so many ways that plants have influenced our lives and our livelihoods. And I want to do that relationship justice by learning as much as I can about it, but also bringing that knowledge forward and making it more accessible to Salish people and non-natives as well, because I believe that when we form a relationship with a plant or with a land or a place, then we have more, I guess, responsibility in taking care of it, or we feel more connected to it. And so there's stake involved with it. So I'm just going to roll through a couple things here and really just focus on what this relationship means and how that ties into climate change and sustainability. So when I was taking on this work, overall it's about improving the health of the people, but also how can we bring culture and tradition and language and traditional ecological knowledge in to infuse the relationship with the land and also improve the health at the same time. So I wrote a thesis about the relationship between Salish people and plants. And this is kind of a chart I created in that process in understanding, okay, well, our well-being is not just the Western idea of our bodies are in, they don't have disease or they're in absence of anything that ails us, basically. So in that description, we're really unwell. We have lots of high rates of chronic illness and nutritional related deficiencies. But when you talk to Salish people and when you talk to different indigenous peoples across the state and across the country, you'll understand that their well-being is very intricately tied to the land and the health of the land, but also it's tied to how they're exercising their culture, how much of their identity is rooted in their culture and their traditions. And so I believe that traditional plant knowledge and stewardship of the land in a gracious and reciprocal way helps with our health, and then also brings the culture in, and it makes this idea of overall Salish well-being. And so when we are well on our terms, we are taken care of by the land, but we're also taking care of the land, if that makes sense. And so I think when I am discussing, what it means to be sustainable and to live with a relationship in urban areas, it means to have a relationship with the land in a way that is something that you cultivate and maybe is, I guess, influenced by your culture and your identity, but also that this relationship can still happen when we live in rural, or not rural, in city areas. I went to New York State for a little bit to do some graduate work, and I was still able to maintain that relationship, maybe not in the way that I saw it was growing up, but when I see the land for what it is and start to interact with it, whether I'm in a new place or in a familiar place, that helps me see it for what it is. And so if any of you have read Robin Wall Kimmerer's work, Braiding Sweetgrass, I highly recommend it to anybody that is interested in evaluating their relationships with the lands and with plants specifically, just to check it out, because it's a really good way of helping us see the land for what it is. And when we see it for what it is and how much it takes care of us, then we can take care of it and we can have this relationship wherever we are. And so to kind of just bring this work that I do into this bigger conversation about landscape planning and management and things like that, I get a handful of people approaching me on, how can we bring in Indigenous perspective in land planning or anything like that. I got approached by somebody in Gonzaga who wants to put in a bike path and put traditional plants all along the sides with like little boards that say, what they're used for, what their traditional name is. And I think, the best way to do that is to approach the people that come from that area. And so they had spoken with the Spokane tribe, which is a sister tribe to the Salish, and they're just working on that. But they came to me asking, how can we bring in traditional plant knowledge in a good way? And how can we bring that to the city so that more people can understand it and see it? And I think just, doing land acknowledgements, but also like bringing in the people that are living and breathing that culture today, and having them be a focal point of the process. And so if, people have questions on how to do that, or if you want to have a further discussion, I'd be happy to talk about that. But really just like my work is how can we bring the idea and the livelihood of plants to our lives, and see them and reestablish this reciprocal relationship that my people and a lot of Indigenous peoples have had for a long, long time. And so, yeah, those were just a couple slides. Oh, wait, I like this one. Actually, I'll show you guys this one really quick. Oh no, I have to go all the way through it. Sorry. Ooh. So these concepts that I have here, these are things that are not just for Indigenous peoples. These are things that all of us can have in our daily lives to honor our relationship with the land or with plants. And so when we honor our roots, when we honor where we come from, for me, that's, being a Salish woman, being a Salish ethnobotanist, bringing my work to my community. That's how I honor my roots. But that can be done with whatever culture someone has, or, however they want to honor who they are. And then acknowledge that the interconnectedness of life exists. So, anything that we do, it has an impact on all the other parts of our life. Like we don't see time as a start and a stop. It's a cyclical process, and our ecosystems are super connected. And so we always try to keep that larger framework when we're out interacting with the land. And then greet it with gratitude. I think gratitude is just a really great way of acknowledging the land and acknowledging your life, and just really bringing in this idea of reciprocity and how we can help each other and help other living beings grow and flourish. So, okay, that was the last slide, I promise. I'm gonna stop sharing. And that was just kind of a little bit of my talk. So yeah, thank you for listening. I hope I'm on time.
Thank you so much, Rose. And any questions, you can either raise your icon hand or put them in the chat. Okay, and if things come up, you can also write them in the chat, and then we'll circle back at the end. But thank you so much. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for this. This is beautiful. I am interested in knowing if in the Missoula area, if there are any opportunities for people to maybe volunteer in a plant nursery, or learning more about native plants and how to, helping spread them and plant them and just taking care of them. That's something that I've been wanting to learn. And I'm just wondering if there's any pointers there.
Yeah, there are tons of opportunities to, I guess, propagate native plants. I I did some volunteer work at the Upper Rattlesnake last year, and we just put a whole bunch of native plants next to the river. I think there is I think you can look up volunteer opportunities in Missoula or go to the Montana Natural History Center website. They have a lot of volunteer opportunities, not just for plants, but for a lot of ways that you can interact with the Missoula landscape or the wider landscape. And then as far as other opportunities, I know University of Montana always is looking for people to help with their arboretum or other their other gardens and what they have on campus. And I think last is Fort Smith, which is a little bit out of town, but they're starting up a traditional native plant garden that I'm helping with. And so we'll have little brochures about traditional plants and how they're used, but they might need some help as well.
Fort Smith, okay. Thank you. Thank you,
And it looks
Rose.
like there's a lot of great resources folks are putting in the chat as well. Thank you for those. And we'll put some follow-up resources in our email next week as well. Thank you so much, Rose. And before we move on to our next speakers, I want to put a few facts out there for perspectives as we continue learning about the exciting potentials of what we can do with these domestic spaces. Over 50 million acres of land in the US has some form of mowed grass lawn on it, which is 3 times more than any irrigated crop in the country. Every year, Americans collectively spend about $30 billion on lawn care each year, use 200 million gallons of gas on mowing these lawns, and roughly 70 million pounds of pesticides. We also use nearly 3 trillion gallons of potable water, or 1/3 of all public water use on these lawns. So while this may be stunning, it is also exciting to imagine the opportunity that we have in transforming all of this space to create public and environmental benefits. So on that, we will move on to our next speaker, Naomi Alhadeff. Naomi is the Senior Montana Education Coordinator for the National Wildlife Federation. She oversees NWF's Certified Wildlife Habitat Program, which encourages the transition of lawns into habitats that are beneficial for wildlife and people alike. Naomi, I'll pass it to you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Why do I feel like that's not sharing? Is it not sharing with you?
I could see it when you had it up.
Okay, can you see that now?
Not right now. I think you're gonna have to share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on. I've done this like 50 times. I can't.
I can see.
Okay.
It. Yeah.
Now? Okay. Sorry about that. So remove everyone's pictures. Okay, so thank you very much. And for joining us. I already was writing notes to myself about Rose, your talk. I don't think I can do it justice, but if you haven't read Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, I also highly suggest it. It's both heartwarming and smart and insightful, and I just loved it. It really changed my perspective. So my name is Naomi Alhadeff, and I am the Senior Montana Education Coordinator for the Montana, or for the National Wildlife Federation. And our mission is to inspire and assist in the conservation of wildlife and other natural resources, and to protect the Earth's environment to achieve an equitable and sustainable future. And I oversee our Garden for Wildlife program, which helps accomplish this, and it encourages individuals and businesses to transition their yards into habitats beneficial for wildlife and people alike. So I will share the importance of creating wildlife-friendly yard spaces, and how your yard or community can become a wildlife haven. So this gets back to what can you do for volunteer opportunities? And this is definitely something that we like to try and do, especially in the warm months. But I'm also joined today by Anna Bays, who's on the call with us. She's our AmeriCorps member, serving as our Montana Education and Outreach Associate. And I mention this because this year, her whole service term is working with the Missoula's Garden for Wildlife program, or the Community Wildlife Habitat. And we will also be supporting the Missoula mayor to sign a pledge to help create space for pollinators in the city. And Anna will be available for questions after the presentation. So I wanted to start out and say that anyone can create a welcoming haven for local wildlife. Turning your yard, your balcony container, garden, schoolyard, work, or roadside green space into a certified wildlife habitat is fun, it's easy, and it can make a lasting difference for wildlife. Missoula is made up of many gardens which are certified, and collectively that makes us a certified wildlife community, the only one in Montana, in fact. So Billings is registered and actively working towards their certification, and that team is led by our affiliate, the Montana Wildlife Federation. So we have a co-branded program and a co-branded sign. And according to NWF, we have more than 150,000 certified wildlife habitats across the country. They're outside schools, businesses, places of worship, community gardens, nature centers, apartments, and homes just like yours. And I'm really glad that Rose mentioned, but this is the picture of the ethnobotany garden on the University of Montana campus. Providing a sustainable habitat for wildlife begins with plants. So that's why we call it a wildlife habitat garden. When you plant native species wildlife depend on, you're planting with a purpose and creating habitat and restoring your local environment. So adding water resources and nesting boxes and other habitat features enhances the habitat value of your garden for wildlife. And lastly, by choosing natural gardening practices, you can make your yard a safe haven for wildlife. So how can you accomplish this? Chances are you're already doing many of these things. A certified space only needs 5 elements to increase wildlife and ecosystem health. That's food, water, cover, places to raise young, and sustainable gardening practices. And in this PowerPoint, which I'm happy to provide afterward, I have embedded all of the links if anyone's interested. But the first thing you'll need are 3 food sources. So native plants provide food eaten by a variety of wildlife. So feeders can supplement natural food sources. So some ideas include bird feeders, plants, which provide food through many seasons and especially through winter. Next is water. And of course, all animals need water to survive. Some of it is needed for bathing or breeding or both. Ideas include bird baths, a pond, even a nearby creek counts for your certification, which we have plenty of here in Missoula or in the county. The next element are 2 types of cover. So wildlife needs shelter from bad weather and places to hide from predators or hunt for prey themselves. So examples could be shrubby plants. I always try to remember to keep it messy. Logs or standing foliage work, even a totem boat like the one pictured here. If you don't know what a totem boat is, that is a really fun kids activity. I'm happy to, Anna and I can assist with. The next element are 2 places to raise young, and that is wildlife need resources to reproduce, and to do this to protect and nourish their young. So in an urban setting, this could be a birdhouse, a small tree in a patio container, or a host plant for your local butterflies. Another one I like to think of is not sweeping up all of your leaves and leaving some refugia for little critters, especially in the winter. My Christmas tree is right out front in my front yard, probably to the chagrin of my neighbors, but underneath is sanctuary for even their tiniest critters, which are instrumental in a healthy ecosystem. Lastly is sustainable gardening. So using no chemicals. Maintain your yard or garden in natural ways to ensure the soil, air, and water stay healthy and clean. Less, or better yet, no chemicals, less mowing, less watering. I would say the hardest part is structuring your garden so it has all of these elements, but this is where Anna and I can assist you with ideas. And remember, a nearby creek or river counts as a water source. So why should we do this? forget the myriad reasons that Rose mentioned about cultural importance to people. In my culture, plants also have a strong cultural importance. But once you think about these 5 steps, when you put them together, the significance of creating a wildlife-friendly yard accomplishes several things. First, it empowers community members to increase their biodiversity, leading to more connectivity for wildlife. Second, every garden or small space counts, resulting in large-scale change. So the certification process helps you find and identify actions you can easily implement, leading to big change. And third, rapid and large-scale changes to our lands and waters means wildlife are losing the habitat they once knew. So every habitat garden is a step in the right direction for wildlife. Like, I know in Missoula, deer are not necessarily welcome in urban settings, but they are wildlife. But if you must block them out, think about smaller critters, butterflies, birds, amphibians, who are incredibly vital. So how can you do this? Certifying your space provides an economical effect in our community. A $20 fee supports NWS programs to inspire others to make a difference and address the issues leading to declining habitat for wildlife nationwide. But of that, a $5 portion of your fee also supports work for local wildlife right here in Montana and my programming, including having an annual AmeriCorps member like Anna. It's a great way to share with others your commitment to a more natural future. And if you want to get on the bandwagon, Missoula City Hall is also certified, but so is the Ethnobotany Garden. And finally, the benefits for people, which are immense, and I could never begin to list them all. But an ambitious 4-year study funded by the National Science Foundation suggests wildlife gardening, if adopted on a wide scale, boosts biodiversity, the variety of life that gives ecosystems their resiliency. Additionally, it's been shown private residential property makes up 1/3 of the urban landscape, and studies show the impact of wildlife gardening is substantial. Other literature shows that habitat owners spend more time outside, overall increased oxygen producing vegetation, visual interest and color of their active wildlife garden, tree coverage had beneficial effects on both people and the ecosystem. So certified wildlife habitats resulted in high percentages of 5 things. Wildlife were more present on certified places. Indicator species, and an indicator species is a species that's most affected by disturbances to ecosystems and can act as an index of ecosystem health. So that would be like monarch butterflies, bumblebees, and frogs. Tree coverage was also higher. In fact, NWF found that the certified wildlife habitats collectively sequestered 811 metric tons of carbon dioxide annually, more than their non-certified counterparts. More native plants were found, and water conservation was easier to maintain. So some of the other benefits is you get a 1-year membership to NWF and the magazine, which if you don't see our magazine, it's phenomenal. 10% off the catalog, a subscription to our Garden for Wildlife newsletter, and you get the exclusive option to purchase a very nice, attractive co-branded sign, which is on this picture here. Normally they're 30, but I have them here in Missoula for 10, which of course means you don't have to have it shipped. Though the sign won't help you attract more wildlife, because animals can't read, at least not English, it might inspire neighbors to create their own wildlife habitat. The sign is a useful way to start conversations with your neighbors. Teach them the joys of nature, of sharing your space with birds, butterflies, pollinators, amphibians, and other critters. And finally, purchasing your sign is a great way to support these organizations who are doing great work in protecting our wildlife. So I know I'm probably out of time, but I threw a bunch of information at you. And if you would like to certify your space or learn more, please visit our website. Feel free to ask Anna or myself. Anna is available for community events related to our watershed and certified gardens. This means the Wild Walk, which we hopefully will be there if the vaccine comes around. And our contact information is in there. If you would like any assistance unpacking all of this, there is a mocktail and a cocktail guide. And that's it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Wonderful. And I will attest that it is very educational to go on and get your yard certified. I've done it, and made changes to do it, and it's easy and educational and a great process. So thank you, Naomi, and your team for making that happen.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
And any questions for Naomi at this time?
Yes, Winona.
Okay, thank you. That was great. I do have a question. So how do we encourage housing development developers to engage with these concepts? So for example, I live right next door to a huge condo development that is on Rattlesnake Creek.
Mhm.
And to be quite honest, it is a dead zone. I have a pollinator friendly yard. I have tons of pollinators and critters. And when I go for a walk through the neighboring kind of development, there are no birds, there are no butterflies, there are no bees there. And it's right next to Rattlesnake Creek. So, and there are constantly lawn people there spraying, and I don't shame or blame anyone living there, but I'm just really curious about that.
That's a great question. I thought about this too. So NWF has partnered with a developer in the Northwest. So unfortunately, they're not here in Montana. And they are like a big time commercial developer, and we've partnered with them to do just that. So I think, I don't know the magic answer, but one way we are trying to combat that is to develop sort of high level partnerships with developers. I said the same word twice. Locally, Homeward is doing that. When they build their houses or units, or I think they're like renovating a big building in Billings, like when they do theirs around Montana, they do think about that. So I would say they're a phenomenal local state and local organization that does take that into consideration. You know, there are initiatives to get Home Depot and Lowe's to not sell plants with neonicotinoids on them. Will they do it? Maybe. I would say it's a really tough one. I would say, I think buying from nurseries that promote those healthy plants and also promote native plants is the best way to put your dollar to use. And I agree, I can't shame people for living in that development. You know, I don't know how to get the developer to listen. But hopefully each individual homeowner can take some steps on their own.
Yeah, maybe reaching out and getting to know the kind of entity that controls decisions for the condo group, and forming a relationship and seeing if we can shift them.
And we also, like, for instance, the Grant Creek area has like 1 or 2 HOAs, and we have a relationship with them and talk about like how they don't mow as much, or how can they reduce the frequency of mowing. So I think getting in with, like, we also do a lot of meetings with the neighborhood councils. I try to be on those as much as possible and weigh in. I've gone to city council meetings and weigh in with my North Side ward people and say, like, it's not a dead zone, but there's like an empty lot over by my house, and we're working on making that just go guerrilla gardening, hopefully with permission, which is arguably not guerrilla gardening, but that's the best I know what to do.
Thank you, Naomi. That's, yeah, and this is what we mean when we say systemic change. You know, the ripple effects are huge with just what we can do ourselves in a time that we might not feel empowered to have big change. This is it. And there's huge ripple effects with all these things. And that includes talking to your neighborhood councils and city councils and sharing this recording when we put it out next week. All of these topics here today are really important for city councils to be involved with, and putting forth in all things that happen within their towns and cities. And that includes our what we can do with our food systems and our lawns and our community spaces to be used for that. Huge ripple effects. And with that, we'll move on to Corrine Irby with Broken Ground. Corrine is a permaculture educator who found a way to stand up for her passions of environmental health and social justice through connecting people through soil and food. Corrine first studied permaculture with Dr. Vandana Shiva at Dr. Shiva's organic farm in India. Corinne is based in Bozeman, and through her business, Broken Ground, helps individuals and communities at all levels of experience increase their resiliency by growing their own food in a way that also benefits our environment. Thank you so much for being here, Corinne.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Super excited to be on this call today and already inspired by the previous two speakers. I want to get my place wildlife certified. Super excited. I'm here to talk a little bit about growing food, not lawns, and those statistics that you shared, Lara, were worse than I thought in terms of where we're at. But growing food is such an opportunity to connect with the natural world and to, build our local food system. So I just wanted to start out by asking people to either put in the chat, or most people don't have their video on, how many of you had either grandparents or parents that gardened and grew food? Right. So it's a fairly common thing, and yet somehow with the advent of industrial agriculture, we lost that connection. So though my grandmother grew food for her family and my mom grew food, I did not learn gardening from either of them. And so I went to someone like myself to learn how to grow food. So this reconnection and this interest and increasing interest in growing local food is a real opportunity, especially since the pandemic. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share just a few slides with you. Let's see, can everybody see that? Great. So I live on a 3/4 acre lot in Bozeman, Montana. Can you see this second one? It says it's sharing. Can you see my greenhouse and my pond?
We can
No.
see, no, we see like the whole
Okay.
setup.
See, sometimes that pauses here. Let me go to the desktop. One moment, please. Go back. Can you see that now? Yeah, okay, great. So I live on a 3/4 acre lot in Bozeman, Montana, in the suburbs. We have a greenhouse, we have a pond, we have large annual gardens, we have fruit trees and berry bushes on our site, we have chickens, and we manage to grow a good portion of our own food. My husband is a hunter as well, so together with the wild game meat and the fruit and vegetables that come off of our property, we can grow a good portion of our food. So I would encourage everyone to garden. Sometimes in permaculture, there's an expression, the problem is the solution. And I like to say, it's not that there are too many lawns in suburbia, it's that there aren't enough gardens. And so there's definitely this opportunity, especially, in Bozeman, we have some of the best agricultural land, and we're seeing a lot of it being eaten up by development. So what's our solution to that? Our solution is to actually use some of those lawns as a place to grow food instead. And we all know there's so many benefits to actually gardening, right? We're increasing our food security, and that's becoming increasingly relevant right now during the pandemic. It's building strength, it's, you're outside. There have been countless studies done in terms of how gardening reduces stress, it improves your mood, it builds community, and of course it connects us back to natural systems. There's nothing more, growing your own food is a very easy way to connect someone to their land and to their place. So I just wanted to quickly, for those of you who are new to gardening, just go over, like, if you are a homeowner that has a lawn in the suburbs or has a small lawn, I would highly encourage you to garden. And I'll just go through this really quickly. And then there's a lot of resources on my website if you want more information. But I like to give people 5 tips. Sun, soil, seeds, start small and stay close. So again, you want a south-facing spot. on your property that has at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, preferably 8 to 10, if you want to grow vegetables or fruit, and you do want to design and plan according to those sun and shade patterns. And again, this is just a good example of, you have the winter sun and the summer sun. And of course, right here would be the ideal garden spot for growing food, if that's your main goal. Soil, pay attention to your soil. It's the foundation of your garden. Healthy soil means healthy plants and healthy people. And so you're wanting to use inputs of compost and manure, but like we were saying earlier, I would not recommend using synthetic fertilizers, obviously no pesticides and herbicides. So we grow organically on our property. And there are definitely lots of resources out there to do that. With regards to soil as well, you're usually wanting to do a 50-50 compost topsoil mix, or you can use what's called the lasagna gardening method to save on materials. And it's a really good way to save what would normally be waste in our system and use it in building your garden. So you can put your kitchen scraps down, you can put your cardboard down to smother the grass, and I'll show you an example of this. But look up the lasagna gardening method and you can Google it, and it's a really great and easy way to establish a garden. Third thing is seeds. Plant grows well in our climate, so paying attention to what does well is really important, especially because we have such a short growing season. Plant what you like to eat. That is something that I recommend to clients all the time. So you have a little more skin in the game. And then tap into local sources where possible. So this is a real opportunity to support local growers, local nurseries that are going to have and grow things and sell things that do really well in this particular climate. And then 4, start small. So if you are new to gardening, I recommend, you start out with a 4x8 raised bed or something like that, and you put something in there. Don't go with like 200 or 300 square feet. I always tell people, grow into your garden. See what it takes to maintain a small plot, and then figure out whether you need to do more than that, or you can do more than that after that. We are, in a sense, right, retraining ourselves as agricultural workers. So getting a sense of the time and energy and commitment that it takes is really important before taking on too much. And then the last thing is stay close. So I do recommend that you put your garden as close to the house as possible based on, the full sun that you have. It makes maintenance a lot easier. And it makes trips to the garden easier if you need those herbs or that lettuce to make dinner that night. You don't want to be going very far. So those are my 5 tips. And these are some examples. A lot of people just start out with like a simple raised bed situation. You might not, like in this picture, want to start with 6 or 10 raised beds. Again, go for 1 or 2. But there are various different types of raised beds that you can do. You can also do in-ground gardens. Those are easy and possible, again, taking out your lawn. And then this is just an example of what we did on our property. When we came to our site, there was this mature apple tree, and this was all lawn. And with that lasagna gardening method, we converted this into a vegetable garden, and this is a little herb spiral and a greenhouse. And then, it grew up, and then we added a pond and collected water. So we collect water in this little pond, and it overflows into this pond. So that's just an example of what you can do. So this whole space now, when we got here, this used to all be grass, right? This whole area. And then this has become this beautiful habitat for birds and pollinators, and of course, feeds us every year. And then another thing that I want to mention is this concept of forest gardens or food forests. And it's where you mimic the architecture of a woodland ecosystem with that canopy layer, the shrub layer, the herb layer, etc. But instead you put in things that are beneficial, both to you that are edible, or they attract pollinators, or they create habitat, or they help build the soil. And so in our case, we did the same thing in another part of our property where when we got there, it was just lawn again. And then we planted pear trees, apple trees, plum trees. And then in 2017, by 2017, this is what it looked like. This is an overhead example of it right here. And so we took, basically, this is I know this is really grainy, but this is a Google map of what the property looked like before we came. Keep an eye on these 2 green ash trees, right? This is what we did with it within, this was last year. So within 5 years, and then this is kind of 8 years of being on this site. These are those same green ash trees. So in this area, we are growing all of these different things and many, many more things. And what I like to illustrate and as an example is right here, you see some green lawn, from the neighbors, and we don't own between this fence line and here. And so what happens every growing season is that this gets watered by the HOA, right? Every single day for 20 minutes a day, starting in May. It really makes me very angry, but I can't do much about it except to give this as an example of, I don't water in here until July. So I end up watering once a week for 6 weeks from July to mid-August. And we get fruit in this space that lasts us. So last year we did not have to buy fresh fruit for 6 months. So again, the possibility of what you can grow in a very small space is incredible. So this is like 90 feet by 90 feet. And the habitat that we've created in here, not to mention the food, is incredible. So these are some of the things that have come out of the food forest: pears and plums and grapes, medicinal plants, apples, raspberries, cherries, strawberries. And again, this is all in a cold climate. So it's kind of, what I'd like to do is to inspire people that all of this is possible, even if we feel like we're in a very short growing season. So again, there are also public food forests and community gardens, which are opportunities to, regenerate these urban and suburban areas, to increase community self-reliance, and then to strengthen the local food system. So here in Bozeman, we have the Story Mill Learning Garden and Food Forest. It's a public space, and it opened a couple years ago. So that's an opportunity for connection, and any of the surplus food goes to the food bank. There's also the 6th Ward Garden Public Food Forest in Helena as well. But as many of you know, community gardens are again a place where people come together. And they may have their separate plots, or there's a really great example in Bozeman, the Spring Creek Communal Garden, where people farm it collectively, and then they have potlucks once a week, and they have preservation parties. So again, kind of reminding us that agriculture was never meant to be a solitary act, and it's an opportunity for connection, and not only a connection between people, but a connection between plants, and a connection to our food. So I would just encourage people to grow in any capacity they can, whether that's just a few pots on their deck or it's a larger garden, but something that connects you, because there is that intangible benefit that's hard to describe when you've taken something from seed and it ends up being a meal on your plate. So thanks so much. I don't know if there are any questions.
So in short, Corinne is a miracle worker, as we saw from those before and after pictures. And in all seriousness, on her site, it can be intimidating, right, when we see what can be done, but she has great ways for all levels to get started on a very small scale, even with just a planter in your window. And how cool to imagine those kinds of spaces in our community spaces, in our schools, and food forests throughout our towns. I can visualize it. So any questions for Corinne right now?
So when you're in Bozeman, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna come and visit and take a tour of your yard.
I'd love that. Yeah, yeah. And definitely I'll pop my website in the chat too for people that are getting started. I have a lot of information on my blog. If people do need more help. Oh, I think I just direct messaged someone. If people do need more help about gardening. But yes, I'd love, this past year I didn't have a public tour, but usually at least once or twice a year I'll have a public tour. But if you do happen to be in Bozeman and want to come visit, we can also set up a private tour as well.
I've been there. It's beautiful. I don't know if you remember me, Karine, but I came in, it's Winona talking. I came and visited you like it's got to be years ago. And things were underway, but not as far as they are now. And we were talking about what we're doing on our property here. And I've transformed a lot of our property as well. Gotten rid of grass. Yeah. So thanks for the inspiration.
Yes. You're welcome.
Thank you, Karine, and great options for communities as well to get together, and so many benefits. And moving on to some other amazing work that can be done throughout our communities. We have Jamie Kirby, and Jamie is with DNRC's Urban and Community Forestry Program. She's the Montana State Coordinator for that program, and the program implements and advocates for the role of trees as a critical part of the urban infrastructure in Montana's communities, which offers a multitude of benefits, which she'll share with us today, as well as speak on some new programs that they're working on around Montana. Thank you for being here, Jamie. And actually, I will be sharing your presentation. Give me one moment.
Thank you, because my screen is being very jittery, so. Here we are. And so I'll just say next, and we'll go into the next slide when
Cool, sounds good.
we'll work as a team. Okay, sounds good. Awesome introduction, thank you. And I cannot believe I'm following such amazing rock stars, and I've taken notes from every one of you, and I cannot wait to collab. This is great. So this is just all complimentary. I feel like this is fantastic information. Montana's Urban Forestry Program, I had to put my spin on it and call it Leaf It Wild. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in here to the next slide. So what is urban forestry? At the most simplest terms, it's all trees and shrubs in populated areas. So think about parks, backyards, boulevards, and 80% of Americans live in an urban area. And by that, we're talking about 2,500 in population, so anything above that. And many of Montana's communities are below this actual 2,500 mark, but more think about the streets and the roads, the sidewalks, and the buildings that create an urban area. I like to say in Montana, if your town has a church and a bar, you're in an urban area. So therefore, any trees that are in that town are part of the urban forest. And this last statistic about Montana communities. Oh, I self-cited myself because that's what I do. So that's why it says copyright Jamie Kirby 2020, because in my mind, all towns have an urban forest. And so don't let the word urban fool you. So this last bullet about Montana communities covering 2.6% of the state's landmass. So imagine the state of Montana and 2.6%, put that into a blob, put it in somewhere on your imaginary map of Montana, and then having 69.5% of our population live within that blob, just to put it into perspective. So Montana residents are a lot more concentrated in urban areas than we may think. Next slide. So this is just a rundown of what Montana's urban forest is made up of. So in 2017, we did a 5-year compilation, assessment, and analysis, a 5 years window inventory of 63 communities across Montana. And these were the results that we came up with. So we have a lot of diversity, but we have a lot of work to do in Montana. There are more than 180 unique tree species. ash species make up for about 30% of the total tree population in Montana. And mind you, these are only publicly owned trees that we inventoried. So those are, in public right-of-ways, in parks, some publicly owned cemeteries, things like that. So that's a lot of ash. The replacement value of these trees, so that means like if it's valued at the point of its age and size in that time period that it was inventoried, to replace a tree in that state would cost $185.5 million, or an average of $1,340 per tree. 55% of our trees are considered good condition, which, okay. And then 86% of the total tree population are broadleaf deciduous species. So more than conifers. A little eye opener there. So next slide. So just a repeat of the previous slide, but in more visual terms. The predominant trees statewide are various ash species. Green ash is native to the riparian corridors in Northeast Montana. Otherwise, most of these are, cultivared, brought in from nurseries. And so about 28% are ash. Norway maple is about 10%. This is for the whole state. And then 4% are crabapple. So when you total just those three species together, you get 42% of our urban tree population. The right-hand column shows the total of annual values calculated from Montana's public trees. And so you can have fun viewing that. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but with 30% almost of Montana's trees comprised of ash, there is this nasty little bug called emerald ash borer that is making its way west. And it poses a significant risk of widespread tree mortality. It is fatal to all ash species. So if you think about the mortality associated with this emerald ash borer, it could wipe out basically what our calculations tell us from this analysis is that it could reduce the leaf surface area, or in other terms, canopy cover, by more than 40% and result in a loss of 6.7 million in environmental annual benefits. So in the case of an emerald ash borer outbreak in Montana, think of that much in loss of canopy, that we could lose that much tree canopy just if that ash borer came in. So that would certainly result in increased health risks. Studies are proving that the tree-human health connection is vital. So in eastern states where the emerald ash borer problems have devastated some of these communities and neighborhoods, the recent research is showing that the loss of trees has resulted in increased respiratory issues. And other studies are showing how healthy birth weights are affected, mental and physical health. They're all connected to urban forests and they're all tied to it. So one thing we need to do in the future is select less ash tree species. Next slide. So just another way to show this visually is we put price tags on some of our trees and show what their values are. So inventory and community trees in Montana provide over 17 million per year in environmental, economic, and health benefits. And this averages to about $124 in annual benefits per tree. Next slide. So this map shows the change in climate across the country. And I have a more detailed map of Montana, but these are the plant hardiness zones, which we use for determining what kinds of plants and vegetation. If a lot of you are familiar with the plant hardiness zones, I'm sure. But this is a comparison map to show how much things have changed. So, colder climate zones, if you'll notice in the Montana and the northern area, are sort of receding, like the receding high line, I'll call it. And so what we're looking at is we have to look at what trees and what species our entire population of trees, native, non-native, all of that, what kind of hardiness factors we can do now with the change in climate. And I'll talk about the silver lining is that, besides that, our planting seasons are longer, our growing seasons are longer. I'm asking people to try some new species, and that's kind of taking a risk, but we're getting to that point now to try that. So If you ever want to try to plant like an orange or banana tree, probably not. But I mean, if you really want to, go for it. I am all for it. So just talk to me about that. So while you're looking at this, just run through the quick benefits of trees. I have to give my spiel. So we all have a collective need for trees. We have a strong tie to them, and studies even show that there's a quicker recovery of hospital patients when a room offers a view of trees. And they play a huge role in real estate. They can add 20% of value versus those of non-landscape homes. Amazing filters of pollution, carbon sequestration, ozone and carbon monoxide reduction, dust abatement, and noise reduction. And trees provide erosion control, intercept water, and with so much impervious surfaces in town, or in other words, pavement, trees are big factors in reducing stormwater and the possibility of flooding. Wind speed and even direction can be affected by trees, which helps protect people, animals, and buildings. And they lower electricity bills in both summer and winter, such as air conditioning costs and heating costs, which creates that insulation and windbreak effect. So next slide. Oh, this one was a live one. It's an animated one. I don't think we'll be able to do it. But visualization is a big part of assisting in designs with decision makers. It paints a picture for planners, decision makers, and election officials. So when we work with our community planners, we try to show them the difference that urban vegetation and trees make. And so this center picture was an urban advantage modeling software that we acquired that showed, the first picture was kind of like this barren entry highway type of scenario that we see in a lot of Montana's towns. And we just showed by adding some vegetation like a median in the middle, it slows traffic speeds, it reduces crime rates, and it just creates overall health and commuter access for everyone. So it's kind of this progressive planning stage where we want people to plan with trees and plan with vegetation in mind and think green infrastructure rather than gray, and how they can work together. The bottom picture just shows the, it was a canopy analysis and a model for, I don't know if you recognize that town, but that's Butte. You can tell by the Berkeley pit up there. And this was just a way to show where is most vegetation needed. So planning ahead, how can we look at, what's barren, what's impervious, grass, tree, and water. And so we did an analysis to show what areas of town of Butte needed. And then the final picture is showing All Chiefs Park in Browning, which is a software called Canvas. And so we took the picture of just the bench and the, kind of the bunch area, the covered area. There are no trees. Obviously, those are animated trees, but we wanted to show them what visualizing adding trees could enhance to the park area. So these really help in our elected officials to make decisions based on the community. Next slide. So understanding the community, I'm so glad that in the beginning that just, it's so important to take the moment to recognize that we do live on Indigenous land, which should be considered, honored, and respected in all forms. And in the last several years, I've had the opportunity to work with tribal communities, which has completely opened my perspectives. Understanding the deep and human spiritual connections to trees, the cultural significance, and what community really means, which would take into account more of the natural world and the environment as part of the community and its society as a whole. It's been a really amazing experience, and it requires a significant amount of investment. And I think it's personal. It comes to the heart to where you must understand and respect the culture and the country. And it takes time to develop relationships. And that's just one of the most amazing things. And as you probably know, government sometimes doesn't work on timeframes that are suitable. So some of my grant projects, I've had to get multiple extensions on or requests because most important thing for making these projects successful is developing their relationships. So community is foundational when working with our tribal communities. And the pathways through education, the multiple generational knowledge, organizations, all of these things. So these are just pictures from some of the projects that we've done. The tree planting dedication, the one on the top left, is actually for a memorial of missing and murdered Indigenous women, specifically for Ashley Heavy Runner in Browning. And that was a really impactful experience. And the picture on the right is a youth and community involvement event in Pryor, Montana. And on the bottom is the annual Day of Honor for the Chief Plenty-Coup State Park. So next slide. So like I said, with the mutual learning, our program in working with the tribal communities is growing, and it's gaining a lot of momentum. And using all of these ideas, we're thinking larger, not just planting trees in a park, or what we're thinking more like, how do we make sure that the youth are included, involved, and that we use add dimensions to tie the human element to trees, involving the health sector or special tree projects. So agroforestry work on the Blackfeet is one work that the first project that I really worked on a few years ago. And we're all really proud to say that they are the first tribal tree campus USA in the entire nation. And they still hold that status today, which is awesome. Yeah. And we work with them to use species of cultural significance for different functions and for purposes in learning. And there's hands-on learning and growing interpretive space at the Polson schools on the Flathead, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And the school teacher there is fantastic, and we're working on creating an edible forest garden. So again, this is all just so exciting to hear and learn more about how we can keep working together on this. In the Chief Plenty-Coup State Park, we are working on reinvigorating their apple tree orchard. If you're aware of some of the history with Chief Plenty-Coup and his apple trees, we actually have a special species named now the Chief Plenty-Coup apple tree. And so we recognize that as the first, species cultivar and it's of its kind. So there is also tree and a vegetation area for acclimation and transplanting in Fort Belknap that we're working on. And that involves the fruit and berry trees that we were talking about a little bit ago. I don't know if you can you click on that link on the bottom? It's just a 30-second clip, but I don't know if it'll work.
Not from a PDF, sorry.
Dang, we'll add that. There's these fun little clips, and there's actually a 5-minute one that is on the NRC website that people can visit later. So we'll go to the next slide. And I'm almost done, I promise. I just wanted to highlight Missoula's projects is that they have been working locally on so many amazing projects of bringing the best practices, tree technology into our communities. So, and Amy knows this, Amy Sillenberg, I see was on this meeting. And so working with partners like that we all can come together to help make our community better. The work with infrastructure in low-income neighborhoods, community development, we worked with the health sectors to create better equity, finding like a walkabout where, in this example, it's showing where sidewalk access has been impacted. The shade shelter project, which you might be seeing now, there's like 3 of them, I believe, throughout Missoula. And this was another amazing project of using multiple partners and resources, reclaimed wood. We're going to plant drought tolerant trees, which will eventually grow to help provide even more protection around the shade shelter and green space. And then Silva cells, which are incredible. And so if you go down to Missoula Art Museum and check out that tree, there is a fantastic interpretive signage that talks about how we have made special underground support systems for trees in the soil. Next slide. So this is just, I know I was just like, bleh, like here's everything, because there's so much. So basically it comes down to this healthy trees, healthy lives example. And there's this researcher named Kathleen Wolf who has this website called Green Cities Good Health, and we can provide that later, but her research is all about 40 years of research and studies about the human connections to trees. She talks about healing gardens, which is a picture I included here, is patient recovery areas. People with PTSD, they actually find that that is a calming meditative area. And I'd like to get some in Missoula and trying to work with the healthcare community here to get that going. And the Shinrin Yoku, if you've ever heard of that, that's a thing, and it is real and it is amazing. And we are working on bringing some of those meditative practices, like doing a Zoom meeting once in a while and seeing if we can get, it's forced bathing, you know, it's taking that intentional walk through trees, and it's prescribed in Asia. And I'm like, let's get some prescriptions going here. And, you know, trees are the cure. So, and then of course, all of the Vibrant Cities Lab is all the graphics on the bottoms. iTree Tools is where you can go and you can actually click on your own house and determine the best place to plant a tree that will provide the most shade or shelter or whatever you need. It'll determine the angle of the sun and get the best growth. So all those resources. And I think the last slide is just for questions, if I even have any time for that. Probably not.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That is fantastic, and so much. And as we're seeing with all these things, the ripple effects are huge. And the importance of paying attention to creating safe public spaces in our towns for those of all communities, including underserved communities. It's so important, and for all the other reasons you mentioned. And we will move on to our next speaker, Kyra, and speaking with safe public spaces. One moment. Sorry. And if you have questions, follow-up questions for Jamie, you can, we'll have her contact info in the follow-up and you can connect with her that way. So Kyra Naumoff. Kyra is the Program Director for Healthy Babies, Bright Futures, which is a national organization working to reduce children's exposure to toxic chemicals. Kyra is an environmental scientist with a PhD from UC Berkeley and over a decade of experience in community engagement and exposure assessment. Through Healthy Babies, Bright Futures, Kyra works with cities and towns throughout the US, including currently with Missoula Parks and Rec, to assist them in reaching goals such as reducing herbicides in public spaces. Thank you so much, Kyra, for being here.
Great, thanks a lot, Lara and Winona, and thanks for all our panelists. It's wonderful to be here tonight. I will cue up my presentation here. Let's see. Now I just need to find the play. Okay. Okay, great. Well, what a wonderful discussion. And I'm happy to, in a timely fashion, wrap up our conversation. And so again, I'm with the nationwide nonprofit Healthy Babies, Bright Futures. And I'm going to share with you a little bit just about our organization to provide some grounding and why our area of focus is really reducing these neurotoxic exposures in pregnant moms and babies, why that window is so important. Then talk a little bit about the Bright Cities program, and Missoula is one of our shining examples in that program that encompasses 20 cities now nationwide. And then amongst those cities, we have a subset that are working on transitioning parts of their municipal turf to chemical-free turf maintenance. And so I'll just quickly share examples from those cities, and then I have some resources at the end of my presentation that may be helpful to you all. So Healthy Babies, Bright Futures was formed in 2016, and our goal is really to reduce neurotoxic exposures, again, in pregnant moms and babies that have the strongest link to developmental delay. And by neurodevelopmental delays, I mean things like autism, IQ loss, learning or behavioral problems, ADHD, and or cognitive challenges. My oldest son, Cohen, has ADHD, so this does have a special place in my heart. And we are supported in our NGO role by a group of academic scientists called Project Tender. And you'll hear me refer to that group more in my presentation, and you can also Google them for good information. And so they came together to share and synthesize the substantial body of literature showing the links between neurodevelopmental delay and these neurotoxic exposures, and also to provide recommendations moving forward. So, like, sort of our foundational question and guiding principle for my work is, why be concerned about these neurotoxic exposures for babies and kids up to 2 years? Well, there really is just so much at stake with brain development during pregnancy and a child's first 2 years. These are really the super precious moments that set the stage for the rest of a child's life. During the first few years of life, a child develops neural connections at the incredible rate of 1 million per second. Whether or not these connections thrive or weaken creates what the Harvard University Center on the Developing Child calls the architecture of your child's brain, a foundation with lasting impacts for his or her future. And of course, like the foundation that your house is built on, stronger connections early in life lead to more functional brains. During early formation, the brain forms more connections than it needs, and with time and experience, it prunes back these unneeded connections. So while exposures to neurotoxins like lead, arsenic, mercury, pesticides, phthalates, and others are not the sole cause for lifelong learning and disability, they are amongst the most preventable. And I've included just a couple of examples here. HBBF, our organization, sells 3 sample lead and water testing kits. And so you can purchase those from the website, or sometimes we provide those to cities. And when you send your water samples back, you get a customized recommendation for your home about how to mitigate lead. And so I have a quote here for how those test results, impacted a person. And many of you, or all of you, may have heard that, arsenic is quite often found in rice-based foods. And so if you know that, you can easily avoid infant rice cereal and instead supplement with rice cereal or cereals made from other whole grains. So there are ways to prevent these things if we know about them. So now I'm going to move on to my specific program. Within Healthy Babies, Bright Futures, we have 3 ways that we try to provide action. One is strategic partnerships and research. The second is communications and lifting up work in the field. And the third is really working with cities in the Bright Cities program. Whoops, let's see if I can go back. So we work with cities because cities can often drive change more rapidly than the state or federal levels. And in a nutshell, what Bright Cities does is provides grants to cities and community-based partners. And typically these grants range from $5,000 to $35,000 to work on a tailored initiative with the city to support a neurotoxic exposure reduction that is important in that city. So the picture here is from Columbia, South Carolina, and they actually did 4 different projects. One was tree planting, and then one was, in this picture here, a community cooking demonstration about how to cook healthy with less toxic foods, i.e. organic foods, or the clean 15 foods that aren't organic but typically don't have a lot of pesticide residues. So we really try to be flexible and work within a city's interests. Right now, as I said, we have about 20 Bright Cities, and we're planning to recruit 10 more this year. And our goal is to really scale up neurotoxic strategies to reduce neurotoxic exposures, in part by integrating these strategies into community sustainability, resilience, and/or climate planning. And so much of the work that we've talked about today dovetails very nicely with projects that I'm working on amongst these cities, and we're always looking to try to maximize the co-benefits associated with our projects. And just to give you the photos, you can see Salem, Massachusetts, similar to some of the projects I heard today, they had an old ball field in a park that had never been developed. And so they took that over as a community garden that does also have the community food forest and providing free organic food. Other projects provide home kits to use non-toxic cleaning. The child laying down on the mat is a toxic-free nap mat. And training was provided in childcare centers in Anchorage and San Francisco. That adorable little girl with the yellow dress is from Minneapolis, and the city there gave baby food away to organizations that were interested. So specifically today was to talk about pesticides, and now I've gotten to that point. And I'm sure many of us, or all of us here, are familiar with, the cons of pesticides. I've included two academic quotes here. Those individuals are also members of Project Tender, our founding academic support group. They also advise on a nationwide nonprofit called Non-Toxic Neighborhoods. And Non-Toxic Neighborhoods supports, I think, over 200 communities in the US that have moved to chemical-free turf maintenance and have really thorough and approachable guides for citizens that are looking to talk with their municipal leaders on a transition plan to a chemical-free turf maintenance. So I would recommend that resource. Another great resource is Stony Fields Organics, and they have provided this nice kind of cartoon to remind us that though we may purchase organic foods for our children, and that is one of the main sources of pesticides, oftentimes we don't think about exposures from playing fields. And those exposures can be much more harmful for children because of their small size and because their liver and detoxification systems aren't completely mature, so they can actually be more sensitive to exposures to pesticides than adults. And so now I'm going to just share 4 of our Bright Cities and examples of their work with the, really the slow transition of municipal properties to chemical-free turf maintenance. So Salt Lake City was one of our first Bright Cities in 2016, and the coordinator that we worked with there really felt that it was worth building the trust and the time put in with the staff in the Parks and Rec Division to make sure everybody was on the same page. And it was, I think I heard it come up before, no shame, no blame, but we're just trying something new. And so Salt Lake decided to proceed in tandem, and they took 2 community parks and actually managed half of it conventionally and half of it organically. And in order to have a demonstration project to show the difference. In retrospect, the sustainability manager, Bridget, thought that probably wasn't necessary and they could have gone straight to just trying a new management practice. But at the time, that's what they decided to do. And in tandem, they launched this pesticide-free Salt Lake City, or SLC, website where citizens could take a pledge to be pesticide-free at home. I think they had over 300 people sign up for the signs. And the project is, continuing to grow as we speak. And what's neat about that is Providence, Rhode Island, which is a newer Bright City, kind of was able to just take Salt Lake City's pesticide-free campaign and take any of the materials that were useful to them and tailor them for the Providence climate. So this materials just went up early this year, and they're going to launch it publicly with the city with a spring gardening campaign. Boulder, Colorado, that's actually where I'm located. They have managed all of their municipal turf organically for many years, but they still noticed a disparity amongst those exposed residents at the over, I think, 50 affordable housing properties in the cities. Those residents were not managed organically. And so our Bright Cities project in Boulder is starting the transition of those soils. And as I've heard others speak about the kind of the foundation of this principle, the foundation of this process is increasing the microbial health of the soil to encourage healthier turf. And so the guy in the light blue shirt, his name is Chip Osborne, and he's really the expert in this field. He's taking the soil samples, which were then analyzed. You can see the top of the lab report below. And so from that, he helps develop a technical transition plan to move away from the synthetic chemicals. Simultaneously, Boulder developed this step-by-step guide to organic lawn care for its residents, which is available on our website and on the City of Boulder's website. And now here's what we all probably really wanted to hear about is Missoula's work. Missoula is awesome, and I've really appreciated talking with so many members of your community who are so dedicated and passionate. I have another picture here. So Missoula, as part of the Bright Cities program, did two different things. First, we worked with Amy and her colleagues at Climate Smart Missoula to buy HEPA filters for the daycare centers to mitigate the wildfire smoke. And the project, I think, with the Bright Cities sort of evolved over the couple of years that we've been talking with staff in Missoula. And just recently, we had the kickoff for the remainder of the funding to begin a transition of some of the municipal land to chemical-free turf maintenance. So you can see that just happened at the top of this month. And you know, we've had very preliminary but exciting conversations about what sites to select, when to do the soil testing, and how to engage community and sort of manage expectations to do this in a way that we get to where we want to be, but also to acknowledge the challenges with particularly budget and just bringing everybody along. And so again, this is a partnership between Beyond Pesticides, which is a nationwide organization around since the 80s. They have a ton of information and their executive director is very knowledgeable. His partner, Chip Osborne at Osborne Organics, and HBBF. And so Lara asked me for the last slide to, you know, talk a little bit about how to approach your city leader. And so this may be pretty intuitive, but, you know, find your interested partners, maybe create an online petition, and then tailor your message and ask for a meeting. And these steps are outlined in more detail in the Non-Toxic Neighborhoods Playbook. We also have case studies on Salt Lake City that, again, has a simplified playbook of how that work was done in Salt Lake City. So here's some resources for you. I would welcome any comments or future conversation or collaboration or ideas about how to continue to scale up this work. And again, thank you so much. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Lovely. I'm going to jump in since we are running late. I really appreciate everyone's patience. And are there any questions before we wrap up? Okay. Kyra, thank you. That was, especially for me with my condo neighbors, I'm inspired to look into these resources and start developing a plan for our neighborhood and reducing the chemicals used here. I noticed the impact of herbicide on my onions. My onions don't bulb up because of certain chemical use. And that's because all around me, my neighbors are spraying them. So I'm inspired. Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your time and expertise today. This was really interesting, and I'm sorry we've gone a little bit over, but that's what happens when we're packing a lot of great information and hopefully providing a really inspiring event. Next week, we are going to email all the people who have registered a link to the recording, as well as resources from the panelists and contact information. So you'll be able to get in touch. So thank you. Our next event is March 4th. It's how to talk to your kids about climate change. And we'll include links to our events in our follow-up email. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Enjoy your evening with your family.